On today's show, Alex Ovechkin is back to full contact at camp.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about Ryan Leonard and how he has to learn how to fail. And it's a funny thing to say, isn't it, right? To learn how to fail. But when you take a look at Ryan Leonard's career in hockey, he has knocked it out of the park at every single level. So for him to not take off right away in the NHL, he's got to learn how to fail. And ultimately, in learning how to do that, he will learn how to win. I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about Clay Stevenson and the waiver wire and the very real possibility that he could get scooped up by another team. But just to get it going here, talking about the big news today is the big man, the great 8, my captain, your captain, Alex Ovechkin, is back to full contact at practice. And to be clear here, he's not going to be in the game, or at least that's what Spencer Carberry says on Tuesday night. But an encouraging sign, as we know, is he left early in the first skate of camp and hasn't returned in full contact. So for him to take this next step definitely shows that he is ramping up and headed in the right direction. So let's dive into that in the first segment of today's show. And that was the big check the box moment for this week. Was Alex Ovechkin. He skated and he was in full contact drills. And the whole time, I know it's funny, there's a lot of people on social media that were like, oh my God, how much time is he going to miss? Precautionary, right? That is what Spencer Carberry has said the whole time. And I think that, when you take a look at Alex Ovechkin, 40 years old now, headed into his 21st season in the league, that I would rather have him take his time and be 100% than to try to rush him into action and exacerbate whatever kind of injury that he's dealing with. But, when you do get older, and, 40 is not old, but for the NHL, it's not exactly young, that you have to take it easy, as the body sometimes doesn't heal as well as it does, say, when you're in your 20s. But that's the big thing. He's been ramping up back after missing the start of camp. And the messaging from the team has been careful, kind of like what I said. They don't want to rush him. They want him to be healthy for the season. And like I said, it's the right idea. We don't know exactly the extent of his injury. And when Alex Ovechkin has been pushed for the nature of his injury, he's like, well, ask Spencer Carberry, ask the training staff. Always kind of interesting answers that you get in these kind of situations. I don't think that sometimes they want to divulge exactly what the extent of the injury is for him. But at the end of the day, like I say, 40 years old, I expect him to have another great season because at the end of the day, he is Alex Ovechkin. He is that Russian machine that never breaks, even though we see it bend a little bit more than maybe we did years ago. But big minutes and workload matter more now than ever. So this practice in real terms shows that he is trending in the right direction. And Spencer Carberry, which I'll talk about here in a bit, hopes that he'll get in some preseason games here because, I don't think that he needs a whole lot of conditioning to get in here. And, to be clear here, this camp for me, and I think for the Capitals, is all about assessment of young talent and to kind of just take the temperature of where the kids are at. But you know what he was? He was getting action, getting reps with the group. He was getting in shot reps. And he was on the ice with his team. The heartbeat of this team make no mistake about it, that there are a lot of great players on this team. Tom Wilson is the captain in waiting, but Alex Ovechkin is still the guy that stirs the drink for the Capitals. So that's the baseline that fans should take away from this, is that he's on the ice, he's working with the team in contact, he's shed the non-contact jersey, and he is trending in the right direction. But to be clear here, not an all clear, but like I said, an encouraging step. Now, what does that mean, you might ask, for opening night? Just reading into it, the team is aiming to have him dressed and ready for at least a couple of early season games. But like I said, they're not going to rush him back until he is 100%. That's based on the assessment of himself and also the training staff. And like I said, the right direction to take. Because at the end of the day, with Ovechkin on the ice, he can produce, and when he can avoid the risk of a setback, that's what they should do. So patience is the name of the game here. And I know that that's hard for everyone that wants to see him back in a jersey, playing in a preseason game, but ultimately that is the right thing to do. Other notes from practice is Sonny Milano. We know that he played 3 total games last season and missed practice today. An upper body issue, and missed some practice time today. But from everything that the team has said, it's not connected to last season's nagging issue. That ultimately they expect him to be back in the lineup Tuesday evening against the Blue Jackets. But the feeling in the room, like I said, is that it's something minor. And when you take a look at Sonny Milano, he needs these reps. He's the guy that's kind of on the bubble, but kind of, on the inside, right? That there's still some players that are on the outside looking in. Sonny Milano has done what he needs to do to put his best foot forward, and he has done that. And I think the Capitals could use someone like Sonny on this team, a dynamic player when he is engaged. And what we have seen so far from him in camp is that quickness, the puck skill that can change a shift in an instant. And like I said, a lot to prove. And, waivers are a thing in there, and that's the same thing with Hendrik Slop here and a lot of these different players that we need to see their A game. So you want him to be healthy, you want him to be available, but sometimes you just have to lean into precautionary measures. Again, we don't know the exact extent, and rarely do the exact extent of these kind of injuries, but promising to hear from the Capitals that he plans or should be in the mix on Tuesday evening. Other good news as well is Nick Dowd is back to doing individual skills and after stepping away for family reasons. So he is that veteran presence that matters. Of course, the key piece to the Capitals' fourth line at the center position, that it is important to have Nick Dowd, who is a dynamic player in the mix. His return to the full group work will welcome for the coaches and for the younger guys who need that steadying voice. One of the players that I talked about, if you're an everydayer of the show, that Nick Dowd was sought out by a lot of different teams. And, there was some fear out there were the Capitals going to re-up Nick Dowd. And they did do that for a lot of different reasons. That you have seen different players plugged and played on that fourth line. Nick Dowd has been that one constant. And what you have seen from Nick is him elevate the play of the players around him, whether it was Duhaime, last season, we've seen different players mix and match on that line. You saw the great chemistry with Hathaway for all those years. But like I said, the one constant is Nick Dowd. And for a team that is going to be leaning in a younger direction for the first time in quite some time, you need those veteran voices like Nick Dowd back in the mix. So back getting in some work there after missing some time due to personal reasons, but he is trending in the right direction as well, and always encouraging to see Nick back in the lineup. So wrapping it up here, Milano's issue looks minor. Ovechkin trending positively. Dowd is back in skills work, and everything is cautious but optimistic for those players that are nicked up, shall we say, a little bit. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the man, Ryan Leonard. So much hype, so much hope surrounding Ryan Leonard. But the one thing that he needs to do is to learn how to fail. What does that mean? I'll discuss straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I've built player props, parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live line games during the game. It makes watching football even more exciting, and you've got a little bit more riding on the action. So, when you're watching on any given Sunday, you already have vested interest. If it's a Commanders game or a Ravens game, but say you want vested interest in all of the games, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about the man, Ryan Leonard. So much hope, so much optimism, excitement that surrounds Ryan Leonard. First round pick. And the real feeling around Ryan Leonard was just let's get him in the NHL. And, he's just going to be goal scoring fuel. I think the thing of it is it's not always, a shot straight to the moon. Not everyone fits the same mold. I think to a certain extent, you take a look at Ryan Leonard and he sees some of the premier names around the NHL, and maybe I can be like a Macklin Celebrini or something like that. But to be clear here, a guy that has knocked it out of the park pretty much every step up in his NHL career now has faced some, I don't know if I want to say setbacks, but I think that he has set the bar high for himself. And I think that he has struggled so far with what we've seen from him in the NHL at achieving the bar that the Capitals have set for him and the bar that he has set for himself. And one of the things that Spencer Carberry talked about is learning how to fail. And it's not all about goals. It's all about big picture. Helping this team win is the above all end all. However, you got to get there. So it's winning with the puck, without the puck. So much to get into. Let's dive into that in the second segment of today's show. And quite a guy, that has back-to-back 30-goal seasons at Boston College. And but even back when Brian McClellan was here, he just said, just give us the word and he's good to go. We'll put you in the lineup. And we saw him last season, right? In the latter part of the season in the playoffs there, and one empty netter. And I think, some people I thought myself as well, wow, I thought there was going to be more. But I think it's important to temper expectations. And it's going to be a slow build, I think, for him. So let's dive into Ryan Leonard talking about and this is one I had to kind of sit on and think, because the coaching staff keeps bringing up the same theme with Ryan Leonard. They're less worried, like I said, about highlight goals, and more worried about how he handles day-to-day adversity or learning how to fail. That this isn't Boston College, that this is the cream of the crop. These are the best players in hockey. But, handling day-to-day adversity, that sounds kind of obvious because, that's huge. If you are going to be successful, it's not going to be you're not going to win every game. You're not going to score a goal in every game. That I think that you need to set limitations on yourself, that it's not always going to be right to the top. And Leonard came into camp and he held splashed moments here and there. We saw in the last game in particular where he looked very good. But, in previous games, not so good. But in the game that we saw most recently here against New Jersey, he scored a highlight reel goal, and then he added a shootout goal in the preseason in the shootout. So you know what I'm saying? I think that he learned what Spencer Carberry said. The thing of it is can he duplicate that? Can he retain that? And can he remember that going forward? That you're going to have games where you're not going to knock it out of the park all the time, and that's okay. But what it is, it's all about building confidence. And, confidence is one of those things that you think to yourself, well, you're in the NHL. By now, you should have confidence on lockdown. But Alex Ovechkin struggled with it a couple seasons ago when he struggled in his goal scoring pursuits. Previous Capitals like Anthony Mantha, that in a lot of ways, once you start scoring goals and you learn how to play the way the coaches, in this case, Spencer Carberry, want you to play, then I think everything else kind of just flows naturally. So that's the big thing, building confidence. They buy you trust with the coaches, but the staff keep saying the harder thing is learning the process of failing and then getting better. And I wouldn't say that, Ryan Leonard has failed, really. I mean, he hasn't been in the NHL that long. But I think inside of him, he's wired to just be the best guy out on the ice. And if he's not, I think he struggles with that. So for Ryan Leonard, what does that look like on the ice? First, it's board work. Is he battling in the corners? Is he winning puck fights in tight space? Those are the little ugly minutes that separate a hot prospect from a roster mainstay. And I think that in his mind, he thinks that if there's a goal being scored and he's out on the ice, it should be coming from him. But it's sometimes the details that lead to the bigger picture. And then the other thing here as well is net front presence. Is he willing to get greasy goals in front of the goalie? Think Connor McMichael last year. They're not all slap shots, right? They're not just, what we saw from him in the last game where he got that goal pretty much from Alex Ovechkin's office. That's good if that is the case, but don't limit yourself to just being that. Is he willing to screen, to tie guys up, to go for rebounds, to do whatever it takes to score a goal and help your team contribute, whether it's an assist or a goal, it's all big picture. Circle back to what I just said there. Connor McMichael exemplifies this perfectly. Greasy goals. He was the guy setting up in front of the net. I think to a certain extent that even Ryan Leonard could learn something from a guy like a Connor McMichael. But being that guy that sets up net front for those greasy goals, those rebounds, it's not glamorous, but it creates goals and it shows your coaches what you're made of, right? That you're not just this guy that has to be, with the spotlight shined on you with a slap shot, scoring goals, wrister, one-timers into the net, those kind of things. That sometimes it's about not the prettiest goals or getting in assists. Third, it's decisions with the puck. In college, he had lots of time and space. In the NHL, that time shrinks. And one of the things that he mentioned as well is his difficulty is that he said the defenders, of course, in the NHL are a lot bigger than they are in college in the NCAA. And ultimately, I think for him growing into that frame, he could take a page from Tom Wilson. Think back when Wilson first entered the league. Big frame, big guy, but definitely grew into that frame. I think that, we have seen Ryan Leonard bulk up, but I still think that there's a bit more to go so he can be that true power forward that can muscle through the strong defenders that are in the NHL. So that's the thing. So does he force plays or does he make the simple plays? Does he make the right read? I think that when the time calls for it, go ahead, call your own number, shoot that goal. But in other instances, do whatever it takes to help the Capitals as a team contribute offensively, right? Being responsible with the puck and without the puck. Those are all things that'll be big for him. And the habit matters more than your highlight reel, right? That it's about, do you play the game sound night in and night out, or is it just a flash here and there? Another thing of this is mental resilience, right? That being able to handle failure, that it's not always going to be easy. And I think that what we have seen in his young NHL career is maybe he struggled a little bit with that mental resilience. For a guy where goal scoring has come easy for him historically, the struggle on him, I think, has taken a mental toll. When he gets beat on a shift, does he fold or does he come back harder? And I think that's there, right? I know that he can lean into the physical game, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be fighting, but can you have that, that pushback, that resilience to say, I'm knocked back, but I'm going to get back into this? Learning how to view mistakes as like training tape instead of moral failing is a real developmental mindset, something that he might not need to work on. And it's one of the things that, coaches preach. Few rookies buy in and others struggle. I'd like to think that Ryan Leonard will be one of the ones that buys into Spencer Carberry's systems because the proof's in the pudding. He has made the Capitals organization better. Spencer Carberry, that is. Think of all the players that had career numbers last year. A lot of that can be tied to coaching. So I don't think that you need to second guess Spencer Carberry. If he's telling you how to do things, execute it. And like I said, the proof's in the pudding. He executed just the way that he said he should. Spencer Carberry told him to in the last game. And look what happened. Scored a goal and got a shootout goal as well. But when you take a look at Leonard, he looks like a kid who wants to buy in. Right? Him getting to where he's at in his hockey career wasn't an accident. He didn't back into victory. He has been able to overcome adversity. But as far as what we have seen in his brief NHL career, as he has shown flashes of greatness. And what are some of the things that we know about NHL players or players that are playing pro hockey? If you want to get a sweater on a night in and night out basis, and more specifically here for the Capitals, it cannot be flashes of greatness. It has to be sustained success. But the real question for the opening month is whether he can sustain the boring habits that win minutes and win games. That he has a lot of accomplishments in his young career at lower levels, but now it's different. And from a roster point of view, Leonard's waivers exempt, so we don't have to worry about Leonard clearing waivers for some reason. I think I don't want to jump to any kind of conclusions. I think it's a pretty safe bet that he makes the Capitals opening night roster, but for some reason, we know there's a lot of players in the mix, right? That say that he doesn't make the opening night roster. There's not the concern that surrounds Ryan Leonard that there is for a lot of other players that have to go through waivers before they get sent to Hershey. So that is one of the things to not worry about. And that gives the Capitals options. Say for some reason he doesn't adhere to the systems and say he doesn't catch on, they can give him AHL minutes to refine the boring stuff without burning his confidence up at the NHL level. Again, that is going down a road that I don't think will happen, but I don't know, right? It's early. And he looked good in the last game. If he can sustain, we don't even need to talk about it. But in the event that he needs a little bit more work, AHL is not a negative thing. It's not a pejorative. It's an organization. You're still playing pro hockey to work on your game. And at the end of the day, that is the luxury of waiver exemption. But it also means the team will have to decide, where they're at with him. And it's going to be tough because I think before going into this camp, I would have said that Ryan Leonard is a lock to make the NHL opening night roster. And I still think that he really stands a distinct possibility of doing that. But it's reassuring to know that if for some reason he's not, that there's players around here that will, fill the void, until he is ready to go. So that's where we're at with Ryan Leonard. He's got to work on the little things. Minutes build habits. Habits build reliability. Reliability builds a sustainable NHL career. So those are the things that he has to work on. It's like I said, working on confidence. It's working on not the flashy things all the time, the sexy plays, where everyone's screaming your name and the lights are shining all on you. That's part of it at some point, but a lot of it is as well. It's the details. And if you think of some of the greats out there, they are detail-oriented players, or they're the players that are willing to do whatever it takes to win the game, whether it's them scoring the goal or whether it's them assisting on a goal or deflecting or whatever the case. Those are the players that have the best careers, I think, in general. Few and far between are players like Alex Ovechkin, who is known almost exclusively for goal scoring. I think that when you widen the lens here and you're talking about players that are more well-rounded other than just being great goal scorers. They have a lot of different tools in their tool set. I think that, Ryan Leonard's young. I know that he knows how to score goals, as evident at the lower levels, but let's make him the most well-rounded player that he possibly can be. So when it is his time, as a matter of fact, in the NHL, that the Capitals have a really great talent that will help this team for years to come. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Clay Stevenson and the very latest that surrounds him. Some players are just waiting for him to go on the waiver wire. What does that mean for Clay? What does it mean for the Capitals? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we're talking about Clay Stevenson and quite a controversy, maybe, in net for the Capitals. And it kind of surprising, not kind of, it's really surprising for me because going into this camp, that was not one of the storylines that I thought was even a possibility or something that I would be talking about is questions in net for the Capitals. But here we are. And I don't know if the organization is having the same kind of questions that I'm having, but, according to Elliotte Friedman, there are a couple goalies, out there right now that if they hit the waiver wire, they're going to just get scooped right up. And Clay Stevenson, if you can believe it, is one of the goalies that Elliotte Friedman and I've talked about on this podcast as well. So let's dive into that in the final segment of today's show. And, the real fear, the fear for me anyway, is that if the Capitals look at Clay Stevenson, is not being on the opening night roster. And, again, before we went into camp, that wasn't even a thought. That the thought is that he's going to go on waivers and he'll just be able to go down to Hershey. I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. If Clay Stevenson hits the waiver wires, he's gone. He is gone. And what's going to happen is the netminder that many people inside of the organization said is the future in net for the Capitals. A prototypical modern day goalie. Big, moves well in the crease, and I think has elite trajectory. I think that, Chucky's good. And what we saw in the last game, hey, I'm giving it up. Chucky was amazing. But I think that Clay Stevenson tracks a bit more elite than Charlie Lindgren does. And that's the hard part for me, and maybe for you as well, is that if there is not home for him here, and a lot of people are like, where's he going to fit? Then the very real possibility is he's down the road. And that's a bitter pill for me to swallow, is these guys don't grow on trees. So let's talk about that in the final segment of today's show. And we're talking about Clay Stevenson and the whole waiver conversation, because there has been a lot of chatter, not just on Locked On Capitals or within the Capitals organization. I'm talking some big name insiders, Elliotte Friedman for one. And he's shown Clay Stevenson that he has the NHL chops. That makes him waiver bait, right? And you take a look at the teams that are kind of chomping at the bit for his services. And one of those teams is the New York Rangers, a team that they were kind of hoping that they were going to be able to acquire before. In a lot of ways, they were hoping that he was going to be able to go to the New York Rangers. But it's not just there. Toronto has some issues in net with some injury. Edmonton, that there are a few, if not several teams out there that are looking for his services. So I think the Capitals need to think long and hard on this. So what does it mean for me? I'm putting the GM hat on here. I would listen to offers on Chucky, despite what we saw in the last game, right? I'm not going to try to take that away from him, but I don't think that Chucky tracks elite the same way that Clay Stevenson does. And I think they know that as well. And that's the hard part, because that creates a problem for the Capitals. If you try to send him to the AHL, to keep him ready. Some other club is going to scoop him up. If they do, you lose him for nothing. Nothing. You didn't get anything. So now the front office is faced with a few options, and none of them, I'm going to say, are perfect. Option one, keep him on the NHL roster. It's not the right idea to have three netminders because he's just not going to get any reps in, or very little. And that prevents losing him on waivers, right? So that's a good thing. But it takes a roster spot and influences cap and lineup decisions. Option two, expose him to waivers and hope he clears. Nope. That's like going out and buying a lottery ticket and planning your future on winning millions of dollars. It might be happen, but probably not. And that's a huge gamble. Option three, move other pieces to create room and keep him protected. Again, it's the bitter pill to swallow. I'm going to be the guy that's dishing out the tough love in this episode. I am listening to offers on Chucky because you could get something in return from him. You will get nothing for Clay Stevenson. You might think to yourself, you could trade Clay Stevenson. Oh, no. That's not how this works. Other teams know that he's facing the waiver wire. So it's a difficult thing and quite a tightrope for the Capitals to try to walk here. That may mean trading from depth or delaying other roster moves. The important thing to remember is that this is not a scouting failure if he gets claimed. It's a product of having a good system and a Capitals pipeline that has turned out great netminders for years when players are NHL ready. That's a positive problem to have in the long run. Does Chris Patrick, as of right now, view Clay Stevenson as an expendable piece? It seems bonkers to me to think that that is something that's even being thought of. And from a game day perspective, what does Stevenson's presence or absence mean? If he's here, you get a capable backup. The feeling is if he does go to Hershey somehow, some way, he is the number 3 in the organization. His path to the NHL one is a difficult one because we know that Logan Thompson signed a long-term contract. Charlie Lindgren signed, or the Capitals signed Charlie Lindgren to that 3-year extension. So that's where we're at. You would have to view, in my opinion, trading a netminder. And it's not going to be Logan Thompson. It is going to be Charlie Lindgren, in my estimation. So if the team decides Stevenson is ready, they might keep him on the roster to avoid losing him. But that's not sustainable. It's not. You're not going to keep 3 netminders around. You're just not. But that's the difficult position. And I think to a certain extent, they feel that the contract that he got made him kind of untouchable or bulletproof, I guess, if you wanted to look at it. And what am I talking about here is his deal, the length of the deal. Stevenson signed a 3-year contract in December of 23, which runs through 26. A lot of teams prefer short-term goalie depth signings. Taking on a multi-year deal for a goalie who isn't NHL proven is a commitment. But I know what Brian McClellan and I know what Chris Patrick are thinking. His cap hit around $775,000 annually at the NHL level, but the guaranteed term plus the AHL number could be enough for front offices to hesitate. I wouldn't count on it. I think that the Rangers would pull the trigger on that in an instant. I think Edmonton would. I think Toronto would. I think any other team around the NHL is a distinct possibility that they would scoop him right up. So I know that they structured his contract in a way that they said that there's no way that a player is going to go out or a team is going to go out and sign him. I mean, they'd be taking on a big contract with some term. And I say big contract for just the level of where he's at right now, considering that he would be making a lot of money if he doesn't work out on one of the big teams I'm talking about. If he ends up playing in their AHL affiliate, that he's making a lot as far as AHL money is concerned. So I don't think that you can put all of your eggs in that basket. I do think, however, my big takeaway from this segment is the Capitals should listen to offers on Charlie Lindgren. Again, I think that if they let Clay walk, I think that it is going to be one of the biggest mistakes that they have made in quite some time. Again, this is not something that I thought I was going to be talking about going into camp here and as it's gone out, but that is where we're at right now. The Capitals risk losing an elite level, in my opinion, at some point, NHL netminder for nothing. I don't think that we can let that happen, but it's definitely a story to follow, and I'll keep you guys covered the entire way on Locked On Capitals. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi, and I'll talk to you again next time.